Let's get into a discussion that we had earlier this offseason that we can revisit right now. Let's fast forward from when the trade happened on January 5th. The Mitch Haniger for Robbie Ray trade, where Anthony DeSclafani and Mitch Haniger come to Seattle, and Robbie Ray gets sent back to San Francisco. Are the Mariners having buyer's remorse on this trade, Lyle?
There's going to be a lot to break down about this. Let's at least start with Mitch Haniger's numbers, just to give people the baseline. We are currently almost at the end of June. Mitch Haniger is hitting .213 with a .608 OPS, a 79 WRC plus, and a negative -0.9 F-WAR. He has, by WAR, been one of the worst qualified players in baseball. This is it's unfortunate because I want to say, I think each of us love Mitch Haniger. The city loves Mitch Haniger. People were fired up when he was traded back here because he's been a fan favorite for a long time. But if you're just looking at the numbers, it has been a really, really tough go of it for Mitch Haniger this year.
I went back and I listened to the conversation we had about this trade on January 5th when this trade happened. Luke Raley was acquired on the same day. There's the double trade day where Robbie Ray goes away. And I say that as for anyone who's a new listener and didn't listen to that episode and wants to say that we're talking in hindsight with this, because it's very easy for us halfway through the season after a trade happens to say failure. Obviously, why did they even bother doing that? Like, why did the Mariners bother trading for Jorge Polanco? It's really easy to say that. But you and I were kind of right in the middle of this trade. I think we got it pretty right on what what required this trade to be successful and what we had the feeling of when that trade happened. Ultimately, remember, while the Mariners made that day about acquiring 2 major league corner outfield bats while shedding some future salary, it was essentially a salary dump of what that Mitch Haniger trade was. The money is about equal in that trade, but overall, remember, the Mariners save $9.5 million next year and then $25 million off of Robbie Ray's contract in 2026 by acquiring Mitch Haniger. The problem is, over those next 2 seasons, all of a sudden the idea of Robbie Ray sounds pretty good right now with where the Mariners are at and where they're at health-wise in the rotation, on top of the fact that the return package in that trade for Robbie Ray neither will be on your roster at the end of this season. Anthony DeSclafani was traded for Jorge Polanco. He had flexor tendon surgery. He would have been out anyway. So that would have already been a scratch whether he got traded or not. And the Mitch Haniger right now, you said one of the worst among qualified players by F-WAR. He is the worst.
Yeah, the single worst one. And it's unfortunate. Again, like we don't say this happily. Everybody roots for Mitch Haniger to be great because he's loved here for a reason. But objectively, he has provided no value at the plate, in the field, or on the base pads. Now, there's 3 parts of this I want to dissect. So let's remember that before we officially wrap this segment up whenever we do. There's the rotation piece of this and what Robbie could do. There was the reasons behind the trade happened, and there's what the Mariners could have done instead. But since you're mentioning Robbie Ray being in the rotation, let's start with that. Brian Wu just went on the IL again. He's really had the injury bug for a lot of the first half of the year. Having Robbie Ray still in this organization, I know he hasn't officially returned yet. He's making another rehab start here on Friday. He's getting really close. To have Robbie Ray on the brink of returning with the possibility to fill Brian Wu's spot while he's out would do a lot for this roster. And if all 6 guys were healthy at once, you could put Bryce Miller in the bullpen. If that's the guy you decide you want in the bullpen, you put one of them in the bullpen. And then you've got a surplus of pitching that would do you wonders. And you'd have what is still on paper. I mean, they have the best rotation in baseball without Robbie Ray. With Robbie Ray, it only makes it that much better. And I got to say this, because I think a lot of people have a very misconstrued idea of what Robbie Ray was and who he was. I want to give people a reminder here, because I think a lot of people remember Robbie Ray for one mistake pitch that he made in what was the highest leverage situation possible, and it went by the wayside. It did not go the Mariners' way. We all know that. And if you need us to say it, we're talking about Yordan Alvarez. Robbie Ray in his 2022 season as a whole, because he essentially didn't pitch in 23. He made like 3 innings of one start and then he was done. He had the Tommy John. In 2022, Robbie Ray had a bad April. That's facts. His first start in May, he was bad. After that, from May 6th until the end of the year, Robbie Ray had a 3.55 ERA in 2022. He had a 3.38 xFIP. If you want to narrow the lens even just a little bit more, through the end of August, Robbie Ray had a 3.34 ERA from the time of May 6th till the end of August and a 3.10 xFIP. Don't get it twisted, people. I know he had one tough moment, in a moment that was not comfortable or regular for the guy anyway, and pitching out of the bullpen on a whim. This was a very dependable starting pitcher the Mariners had. He might not have been a Cy Young winner. He was a very reliable starting pitcher and a good starting pitcher. So don't get misconstrued about what Robbie Ray was when he was here.
We can take the Mitch Haniger part out of this trade for a second. I want people listening, I want people to ask themselves this question when thinking about this trade. For the rest of the season, right now, at this point, knowing Brian Woo's health, would you rather have Robbie Ray in your rotation or Brian Woo in the rotation?
I mean, the health factor plays. Well, the health factor is going to play into it with both of them, because Robbie Ray's still recovering from Tommy John.
It will.
But I mean, this is a tough question for me to answer because, again, I love watching Brian Woo pitch, and I know when he's at his best, as we've all seen this year, he's awesome. But if you're factoring in the fact that, it's been hard for him to get stretched out this year, if that's your answer, then sure, maybe you lean a little bit more toward Robbie Ray, just because he can go, what you expect would be deeper into games once he is fully back from this Tommy John surgery. So I don't know if I'd necessarily say I'd absolutely rather have Ray over Woo, but if you're answering the question of the health piece of it and the working into games piece of it, like that's a fair take to have.
I don't know if I'm on one side or the other with this necessarily, but I'm not confident even after Brian Woo comes back that he makes every single start. And that makes people nervous. We're at this point right now where people are saying that the Mariners need to go out at the trade deadline and trade for a starter. Well, it would have been great if that starter was already in your organization. If Logan Evans had thrown 170 innings in college last year, then maybe we're having a different discussion right now and you have another option. But people are like, the fact that people are asking for a quality major league starter as a potential option at the trade deadline, that will cost a lot. These things aren't cheap. If you're acquiring a non-rental starting pitcher at the deadline who's any semblance of good, it's going to cost you a lot. And those resources could have gone to your offense as well. But that's where you said, okay, well, we put those resources into the offense in the offseason, and those resources hadn't paid off. So who's a better pitcher between when Brian Woo gets back and Robbie Ray this season? I would actually lean Brian Woo. Who's going to make more starts? Wouldn't be surprised if it's Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray, until he had Tommy John, was the cleanest bill of health in Major League Baseball. The cleanest. He didn't miss starts, period. This was the first injury blip of his career. And you could be pretty confident that now that guys come back from Tommy John more consistently and better than ever, that he would be fine. He'd be capped innings-wise, but so is Woo. He's the most capped innings guy, arguably, in Major League Baseball. Maybe not the most, but one of them, for sure.
So that entire discussion, and I think that's right, about upside-wise, you might rather have Woo. If you're thinking about the dependability, Ray. So let us know what you think in the YouTube comments about that, because I'm sure everybody has a different take on it. But that's kind of phase one of this conversation about what it would have done for the rotation. Now there's phase 2 and 3 about, I want to kind of turn back the clock and get back to January here when this trade happened, because here's what I remember, us included, like we're not, I mean, we were definitely in this boat too. People were fired up for Mitch Haniger to be back in town. Absolutely fired up. And people weren't exactly sad to see Robbie Ray go. And again, I think a lot of fans out there have a misconstrued perception of him in terms of who he was, because he missed all of 2023 essentially, had a really bad moment to end 2022, but easily forget he was actually a very dependable starter for about 5 months of the year in 22. Was this, I know part of this is going to be in hindsight, but was Mitch Haniger the most ideal fit for this roster? I mean, even within their payroll constraints, was this the most ideal fit? There's part of me that wonders that, look, we like fans went through the ringer this offseason. In December, people were put through hell with the RSN news. They weren't spending money. They were cutting payroll. They traded Jared Kelnick. We found out they essentially made no run at Shohei Ohtani. Even if most of you thought he wasn't going to get signed, I think people expected the Mariners were going to at least try and do their best, and it doesn't really seem like they did. So all of that, like, people were really mad. Like, it was as toxic and as angry as I've seen this fan base maybe ever. But then that Mitch Haniger trade happens in January, and it's this feel-good story, and he comes back to Seattle, and people are upbeat. I almost wonder, by no means am I saying they made this trade to please fans, but I'm more wondering from the fans' perspective if the fact of the nostalgia of bringing Mitch Haniger back maybe clouded the judgment of what he could possibly be. Because everybody remembers Mitch Haniger as one of the thumpers and anchors in the Mariners offense. Mitch Haniger barely played 60 games a season ago, and he put up a 73 WRC+. Was there not some writing on the wall there? I know part of this is hindsight, but some.
There could have been. 33 is a decent age to drop off at. It's usually sometime from 31 to, I don't know, 34, 35, where if a player is going to drop off and not have like a David Ortiz level ride off into age 40, then it's going to happen then. And usually it's pretty sharp. And the Mariners have seen it. The first 2 months of this year, it looked like Mitch Garver was dealing with the lack of bat speed, along with his other adjustments and age. Another guy who's also 33 years old. Both Mitches are 33 years old. Mitch Garver, however, has adjusted and done very well in June. Colton Wong last year, Lyle, was 32. The Mariners acquired him. And he looked every bit of a player who just didn't have it anymore. And he hasn't played this year. He's cut. He's gone. He's out of baseball right now. AJ Pollock. How old was AJ Pollock last year? 34? 35? Right. So
he was in his mid-30s.
He had already been declining, and then the Mariners got the worst of it. So this age is not surprising that it dropped off. I think the Mariners might have thought they know the work ethic of Mitch Haniger. They know how dedicated he is to his craft. And Ryan Divish talks about it as all the time. No one takes better care of themselves than Mitch Haniger. So they thought that, and we mentioned this, by the way, when we talked about it back when they made this trade, that his injuries last year were more fluky than they were of a deteriorating body. Because one of his injuries last year that kept on a long time was a fractured forearm on a hit by pitch. Well, again, you can't control something like that from happening. So you imagine, okay, even though Mitch Haniger played part of the time in 2022, he was still an above average hitter. And at the time, that's all the Mariners needed. They wanted somebody to pair with Dom Canzone in the outfield that swings a right-handed bat. Would you take the 2022 113 WRC plus of Mitch Haniger in the outfield against left-handed pitchers with solid defense? I think that's what the Mariners thought they were getting. And it was now a misrepresentation. The PR is nice. It's good because the Mariners really needed good PR in the offseason. And they got it by acquiring Mitch Haniger. But baseball-wise, if you're able to convince yourself and you check the boxes to make it make sense for yourself that this was the right move, then I understand it. But it hasn't worked out. Now, if we're going to talk about the other part of this, which I mentioned at the beginning, part of the reason why it is a PR is because they essentially had to salary dump Robbie Ray in an effort to save more money and free themselves up in the future. The Mariners, I think at least a tiny inkling, made this trade because they didn't know what their finances would look like in 2025 and 2026 when Robbie Ray was going to be due $25 million. Saving the $9.5 million next year and then the $25 million 2 years from now, knowing that your starting rotation is going to get more expensive, your catcher, Cal Raleigh, is going to get more expensive, and that doesn't include adding anyone else outside of the organization, while not knowing what your income source will be. So they have an eye on that too, And we rightfully said it at the time. That's what that is. So there's a lot of factors when it goes into analyzing this trade both in a baseball sense and outside the baseball sense.
There is a lot of factors, but that also brings me into phase 3 and the last part of this that I want to talk about. And it's right on line with what you just explained and why the move was made and the Mariners not being sure of their budgets. This ties back to what I said a few minutes ago was this the ideal fit of a bat for them to acquire in Mitch Haniger? And I'm not talking about them and going and getting Shohei. Like obviously like within their constraints. I still wonder, and here's why I wonder this. If you really wanted to get Robbie Ray's contract off the books, if that's what it was about, and you wanted to shed even more payroll, and you just didn't think Ray was going to be a fit here long term, fine. If you had just shedded Robbie Ray's contract, where you had essentially traded him to the Giants, not gotten a lot back. I mean, that probably wouldn't have been a great look for, especially
you might have had to send a prospect too, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So say you just wanted to get his contract off the books, but it freed you up to go make a move for an impact bat, somebody that is of a higher caliber. It would have costed a little bit more, whether it was in a trade or free agency, but would have significantly added to the lineup of this ball club. Like really been an impact outfield bat. It's possible. Like they could have done that. And there could have been guys that they went out and acquired that would have really made the difference. And if that was the case, we'd be having a different conversation right now. It's they got rid of Ray's contract to bring in player X, and he's significantly helped the offense. But had you kept Robbie Ray and held on to that contract, but still felt like you needed a bat, I still think they could have gone out and done something else. And here's what I mean. I'm going to give a couple examples here. Tommy Pham would have cost you $1 million US American dollars. Tommy Pham was not signed until into the regular season when he took a minor league deal with the Chicago White Sox. If you really wanted to go get a bat for cheap, you could have gotten Tommy Pham. I'll give you a couple more examples. Now, this one is extreme, but the point still stands. For 1 year and $1 million, Jurickson Profar is playing for the San Diego Padres. Younger, a little bit more athletic, like can play a few more positions. And now that's the extreme. That's the extreme one.
He was bad last year.
Nobody expected him to do. He was bad last year. Nobody expected him to do what he's doing right now. But I'm just giving you another example. Or the final one, if you had kept Ray but found $10 million or so in the budget to go make one more move, I'll use this example. Harrison Bader signed a 1 year, $10.5 million contract with the Mets this offseason. Harrison Bader has a 113 WRC plus, striking out less than 20% of the time, and has also racked up 1.5 FWAR here on June 27th. He has 5 outs above average in the outfield. So he is playing great defense. He's not striking out. He's hitting, and he didn't cost a lot. So there were other options out there where if you felt like you needed a right-handed bat in the outfield that wasn't going to be that expensive. Okay, Profar's mostly a lefty. Is he a switch hitter? I think he's a switch hitter.
He is.
Yeah. So, okay. So point being, if you wanted a right-handed bat in the outfield, like there were other guys you could have gone out and got. And I know a lot of this is in hindsight, but it just makes me, again, think back to, were there more baseball style moves that could have been made here? I don't know. And
yes.
I just feel like the injuries and the low and the low WRC plus for Haniger last year, maybe it was writing on the wall. And we know he's been injured a lot of his career. So had you kept Robbie Ray, there were still options out there.
Again, what the Mariners needed out of Mitch Haniger this year was for him to play defense and for him to hit lefties. That's what the Mariners needed. Now, there were some injuries at the start of the season. The offense was underperforming. Mitch got off to a hot start. He probably played more than he should. Mitch Haniger is one of the worst this year, has been one of the worst outfield defenders in baseball, and he has a 20 WRC plus against lefties. When you ask him to do two things, and he does those things worse than just about anybody, it's a little bit hard to predict, judging that he had never been that bad against those qualifiers in his life. But you're right. It could have been, you could have been seeing the writing on the wall. maybe we should not be acquiring 33-year-old off-injured players, even if they're fan favorites.
So is Harrison Bader not currently doing exactly what the Mariners wanted Mitch Haniger to do? He's
Yeah.
playing great defense. He's been about a 110 to 115 WRC plus guy. He's already surpassed his WAR to money ratio, by the way, because $8 million is worth one WAR in baseball these days, about. And Harrison Bader's already at 1.5 wins above replacement basically halfway through the season. That's exactly what you were hoping to get. So, yes, like I'm just looking at other options and saying, well, there were other things out there they could have done.
Okay, so Harrison Bader's $10 million. If you sign Harrison Bader, is Robbie Ray still on the roster, or are you dumping Robbie Ray in this still? Because then they might not be able to acquire Jorge Polanco, which to some people would say, okay.
Well, but what if you still get Descalfani's contract off the books? Because that helped a lot.
It
Because
did,
like
but
Ray for Haniger, again, Ray for Haniger was net neutral. That didn't change the payroll that much. I think getting Descalfani's contract off the books helped them get Polanco.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. So, yeah, they technically could have. But it's still, in that sense, then there would have been no Jorge Polanco. If Ray stays on the roster and they sign Harrison Bader, there would be no Polanco. Now, I think you and I still think Polanco's going to turn it around, right? But there are people out there that would think that and say, well, the Mariners would actually be better today if they did that, because they would have more starting pitching stability down the stretch, and they would have a productive outfielder right now. So that, to each their own on that, but that's one way to go around it. You could still make a trade with somebody else to try and cash neutral Robbie Ray's deal. I would imagine there was more than one team interested in Robbie Ray being available. I mean, his no trade clause was only over for 5 days before they traded him, where all 29 other teams could have traded for Robbie Ray if they wanted to, because he had a no trade clause the first 2 years of that deal. And then once January 1st of 2024 hit, he could go anywhere. Therefore, any team willing to take on that money could have traded for him.
And I will also say, I still think there is a world where the Mariners could have signed Harrison Bader and still traded for Jorge Polanco. Because if I had to guess, Anthony Descalfani was not the premier reason the Twins were trading away Jorge Polanco. No, I think the Twins wanted Justin Topa and Gabby Gonzalez. I bet you there still would have been some way to work that out.
And they wanted to get money off the books.
Yeah, they did. But I don't think keeping Ray, signing Harrison Bader would have totally canceled the idea of trading for Jorge Polanco. But again, this is all in hindsight. It's just our perspective. But I think every Mariners fan is feeling right now that they wish there was a little bit more production out there in that outfield from that spot.
So then how do you avoid making this mistake again?
Maybe it's like what you said. If guys have this long of an injury history, maybe you can't trade for them. Maybe the mid-30s thing's unfair because not everybody falls off in their mid-30s. Like you said, Mitch Garver's now turned it around, but they have had more misses than hits with mid-30s trades or signings with guys between, Colton Wong, AJ Pollock, now Mitch Haniger. There's no perfect science to avoid it, but maybe they've had enough of a data sample build up now with these type of players where they say we can't, it's going to be risky to acquire guys like this moving forward, and maybe they do less of it.
Yeah, they might. We'll see, because especially with the payroll constraints that will go forward into the future with the uncertainty of their TV deal, they can't afford to screw up as much, because it's not like the Mariners at some point this year are probably going to cut Mitch Haniger because it's just not working. There is not enough production to make Mitch Haniger on this roster worth it right now. There's nowhere you can play him that you feel comfortable with. You can't bat him anywhere in the lineup and feel comfortable he's going to consistently produce, and he's not running on the base paths. However, so they're going to have to probably cut him, and they will be on the hook for $16 million this year and $17.5 million next season. Now, if you want to turn it over to the Robbie Ray thing, if Robbie Ray was still a Mariner, you would still be paying that money, and you'd still be paying a little bit more, but Robbie Ray would most likely still be pitching in the Mariners rotation next year. And Mitch Haniger will most likely, if they do what I predict, Mitch Haniger will be playing somewhere else, and the Mariners will be paying $17.5 million.
And let's say this too about Robbie Ray's contract, because I'm pretty sure you mentioned it. he has that opt out after this year. I don't think Robbie Ray's opting out, considering the fact he's missed nearly a year and a half and has guaranteed money on that 5-year, $115 million deal still in his back pocket for the next 2 seasons. I think he's keeping it.
Yeah,
So
I think so too.
yeah.
So there are lessons to be learned here. Baseball is very random. You can't always predict these things. Some guys boom in their 30s, some guys don't. And it's up to the Mariners in the future to make decisions that will lead them less vulnerable to the AJ Pollocks, to the Colton Wongs, to the Mitch Hanigers, to whatever. Because the reason you and I spend so much time talking about how the Mariners could acquire Brent Rooker at the deadline is solely because Mitch Haniger is not producing, because they don't have any right-handed hitting outfield production. And Julio, by the way, didn't even mention that. But there's no right-handed hitting outfield production right now. Partially because of that, partially because of Julio. And it's up to the Mariners now to try and make sure that doesn't happen.